In this episode of Desert Lore, we're going to be talking about the enigma of bighorn sheep. Throughout the American Southwest, there are petroglyphs of all different kinds, spanning multiple cultures and going back thousands of years. These depict animals, hunting scenes, maps, calendars, doodles, and depictions of self-expression such as handprints. All of these are not a written language, and some of the descendants of these people can give us insight as to what these images may mean. But because they are not a written language, unless you talk to the actual person who made the petroglyph themselves, you cannot know exactly what they mean. However, years of research and observation can give us some insight, as well as talking with First Nations peoples to get more insight and clarity. In this video, I will be discussing what my views are on the enigma of bighorn sheep and why the bighorns themselves are an odd icon. Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here. So in this video, we're going to be talking about bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep are incredible creatures. We have a fair amount of them today in Utah, but it seems nowhere near as much as we did in ancient times. Now, I like to spend a lot of time filming these guys. There's some fairly close to my house, but I use a drone. They're very tolerant of drones, and I can literally get right up next to them, and they kind of look up, and then they'll kind of walk off, and look up and walk off again. They're very tolerant of drones. They're amazing species, and a lot of reintroduction efforts have gone on. So typically, if you ever find a wild herd of bighorn sheep, you will notice some of them have their ears tagged, and usually at least one member of the whole herd will have some sort of a radio or GPS collar around its neck so that biologists can keep track of where they're at and where they're moving. Now, one of the big problems of this species is in the 1800s, the introduction of domestic sheep nearly wiped out bighorns in many regions. The reason why this is there's certain diseases that domestic sheep have that wild bighorns are not immune to. And even if a domestic sheep ate off of a little bit of sagebrush or something, and then a day or two later, a bighorn ate off of that same thing, it would get the disease and die. So these are protected species. They are hunted as well. But we see petroglyphs of them everywhere, all over the Intermountain West, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico. Now, I do not know if these petroglyphs also continue into northwestern Mexico. A lot of these videos I talk about how there was no border between southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico. I assume that this continues on as well, but we see these petroglyphs. But here's the interesting thing. It's very easy, if you're a lover of rock art and petroglyphs and pictographs, to just be, well, it's just a bunch of art from a long time ago. But we see very distinct styles come and go throughout time. So for example, the Archaic period, not too long after the Ice Age, these styles are very strange indeed. They're usually painted with red ochre pigment and hide glue that has lasted for thousands of years. These images seem almost alien to us by today's standards. And the people who made these Archaic period images, they basically never depict bighorn sheep at all. Now you think about all the animals that existed in the pantheon. At the end of the Ice Age, there were big animals like giant ground sloths, American camels, and woolly mammoths and Columbian mammoths, things like that. And we rarely do see depictions of those kind of things. But once you get into the Archaic period, it's mostly just strange, ghostly human depictions or humanoids of some kinds painted on. And you don't normally see images of animals at all. It just disappears. So you go from depicting animals in a hunting sense to this other time period where you have a totally different style emerge. And then in much more recent times, like the past 2,000 years, then suddenly you see an explosion all over the West of bighorn sheep in rock art. Now, there's kind of two main cultures that we're talking about here today. Specifically, anybody can depict anything they want. Anybody can just be like, hey, for whatever reason, I'm depicting a bighorn sheep. But there's two main culprits, two main artists who depicted them that we see most commonly in the American West. The first are the people that now are being lumped together and collectively called the Ancestral Puebloan people. Now, in the past, sometimes people were just called the Anasazi, and now there's like, oh no, there's a differentiation, there's two different people there, or no, they're one and the same. We just, right now, currently, it'll change. You watch this video 10, 20 years from now, it'll change again. But the current term is the people who lived in the region depicted on this map are the Ancestral Puebloan people. They had different ideas, they had different tribal affinities and different religious ideas, but the architecture is similar enough, and a lot of the religious depictions and the artistic depictions are the same enough that we kind of lump these people together as the Ancestral Puebloan people. And they did depict a lot of bighorn sheep all over the place, bighorns everywhere. And these people, again, we keep kind of going in and out on how we date or when do we consider this a people loosely. And we kind of say about 1,200 years ago is when they kind of, the start date of the Ancestral Puebloan people. Obviously, there are people there before and after. Could be the same people, but that's kind of the cutoff. The other people are mostly in Utah, and we can take a look at a map here. It covers a little bit of surrounding states, but these are the people that we call today the Fremont people. And again, 10, 20 years from now, somebody online will say, that's an offensive term, and we instead call them this. Fine, doesn't matter. For now, this is in our time period, what we're currently calling them is the Fremont people. And they are from around 2,000 years ago to about 700 years ago. Now, Fremonts and Ancestral Puebloan people, these two different groups had very similar way of life. And we even know from some DNA tests that have been done on some remains that they were even interconnected genetically. So why are they different? Well, they hunted, they both farmed, they both hunted, they both gathered, but some of the primary differences, the Ancestral Puebloan people typically built adobe pueblos. So that might be up on a flat surface or it might be a cliff dwelling. But either way, these are dwellings that are made with stone and with adobe clay used as a mortar to put it together. And it's a very distinct style. Now, they also had a very distinct structure called a kiva. Now, if you look at a kiva that is open today, that is the roof and everything have been collapsed and it's been excavated, then it's kind of a big circle and it has, you can see these little pillars and stuff. But if you go into a reconstructed one or one that is still intact and hasn't fallen apart, it's basically flat on the top. It has a ladder to go in, and then you're in this subterranean world. The insights we have, both from archaeology and from descendants of Ancestral Puebloans, seem to indicate that these were sacred spaces. But some tribes have also told us that they were additionally a communal space at times. It's like, hey, it's really cold, let's all go in the kiva and sleep in there because it's a really cold night. And that it wasn't just, oh, this is a very sacred space. There was also a communal space at certain times for certain reasons. Again, the people who made these kivas themselves are not here to answer that directly for us, but we can glean much information from the archaeology and from the descendants of these peoples. But that's a kiva, subterranean, total flat surface. Well, the Fremont people lived in something different. They lived in pit houses, which are surprisingly similar to a kiva. A pit house is not all below ground. It's part above ground, it's part below ground. So you dig down and then you make posts going up, and then you put earth over the top, and there's a ladder on top. So the entrance and exit of a pit house is really about the same as a kiva. But again, the top of a kiva is totally flat with a ladder coming in and out, where the top of, you have to walk up onto a pit house and then go down in. Now, whether used, now we know that pit houses were used as a dwelling. We know that from the archaeology as well. Where kivas, it seems like they were more for ceremonial reasons. But again, these two ideas are so similar and the construction are so similar. Clearly, these ideas had influence on each other, whether it's from coming from a common ancestor that took a common idea and split it two different directions. We don't know. We know that adobe clay is much more common and available in the more southern regions where the Ancestral Puebloans lived. So mixing that with mortar makes a lot of sense. Where you do have up north, Fremont, you do have Fremont villages that are built very similar to pueblos occasionally, but usually it's pit houses. Usually it's pit houses, but they would still have masonry, adobe masonry granaries still up in the cliffs as places like, here's where we're going to store our corn. But usually the groundwork was not as elaborate as it was with the Ancestral Puebloan, but very similar, very similar. So you have pit houses, but you also do have some masonry with the Fremont people. So now we know these two peoples. These are the two peoples where we suddenly see depictions of bighorn sheep everywhere, all over the place. A lot with the Ancestral Puebloan, but at an insane level with the Fremont. It was on their mind. Now, that's great. And an easy assumption would be, well, they hunted them. So take, for example, Plains tribes. Plains tribes who hunted the buffalo, icons are everywhere because your buffalo is what you're eating. It's what you're making your clothing out of. It's what you're making your teepee, your home out of. So it's everything. The buffalo is everything. The bison, the buffalo is everything. So it makes sense that you're going to have iconic images of bison everywhere in the art of Plains tribes. Okay, my ancestors are the Sami people from Scandinavia. It's the same thing. My ancestors live in a type of teepee called a levu, and we hunt reindeer and herd reindeer. We make our clothes out of reindeer. We make our teepees, our levus, out of reindeer. So again, we have the images of reindeer everywhere. That's like the most important animal. So one would assume, oh, well, the Fremonts and the Ancestral Puebloan people were hunting bighorns all the time. And so in a similar way, oh, of course, you know, well, that's not the case. The very interesting fact and truth that is often overlooked is at both Fremont and Ancestral Puebloan sites, not many bighorn bones are found. There's bones of turkey, there's bones of deer, there's bones of elk, there's bones of antelope, there's bones of rabbits, but very, very rarely do we find the bones of bighorns at these sites. It's very unusual. So think about that. Everywhere. You automatically know. You're like, oh, it's got to be a Fremont site because there's a bunch of bighorns everywhere. We know that these were on their minds. Now, bighorns are powerful creatures. They're tough and they butt heads. The males, the run they go, they ram into each other, and you hear this echo firing through the canyons as they just slam into each other. It's a powerful image. It's a powerful being, and I think it will be pretty iconic to see that firsthand in the wild. Bighorns, rams ramming into each other, living up to their name, rams. So it makes sense that these would have been powerful figures. What we see is after these people, after the Fremont wane, and after the Ancestral Puebloan people, become the tribes we know today, suddenly we see in both of these peoples, when it comes to rock art especially, the bighorn goes way down as a symbol once again. So if you look at one of the rock art sites I've been showing this, where I showed the archaic art, there's a panel nearby where much more recent tribes, such as the Utes, depicted, and they're depicting things like horses and buffalo, and they're not depicting bighorns at all in any way, shape, or form. So something was different here. It would seem, we don't know the answer for sure, but it would seem that this is kind of a strange enigma, that again, in earlier times, bighorns weren't really commonly depicted, and then this profusion from, about 2,000 years ago to about 700 years ago, at least two different cultures. And again, Fremont and Ancestral Puebloan, these are very general terms. These people themselves would have had tribes and cultural affiliations. These are just ways of life that are similar. And so you would have had different peoples within this, but in these big populations, ranging from, spring-fed snowy mountains all the way down to low red rock deserts, among all of these people, again, from about 2,000 years ago to about 700 years ago, bighorns were on their mind in a big, huge way, and not necessarily as a food icon. We know they did eat them occasionally. One of my other videos I went up to Bone Cave up a local canyon that had two archaeological digs there actually, and they did find a fair amount of bighorn bones there. But the interesting thing is, most of those bones were dated and attributed to the Ute tribe, which came, much later than, that 700-year cutoff. So, Utes were around before them, but it's like that's when they were in that area instead of the Fremont. So before then, again, we don't see that much hunting of bighorns. We just see a great reverence and a great artistic expression that these were on the minds of the people constantly. And you do rarely see other things. I do see occasional depictions of things like pronghorn antelope. It's very rare. Or you do occasionally see deer, elk, you have big old branching antlers. You do occasionally see petroglyphs like that. But it's rare compared to bighorns, and bighorns are everywhere. So it just seems like, and some people will say, well, this is kind of a clan affiliation. It's kind of like, I don't know, the United States, our national bird is a bald eagle. So if you're like, hey, everywhere we go, we're going to put a sticker of a bald eagle because this is America. Maybe it's kind of like that. It's like, we're the bighorn people. Don't know. That could be, it's a possibility. We're not entirely sure. But what we can surmise is we know that even though the people that we call the Fremont and the Ancestral Puebloans were two different people, and again, different people within those two peoples, we know they were connected, we know they traded and they shared ideas. Some of the things are very distinctly different. For example, at Fremont sites, we almost always find what are called pilling figures. These are very unique clay figures that are not fired. They're made out of clay that's just dried, air dried, and then painted, and they're almost always paired. So there'll be a male and a female that are paired together and wrapped in a bundle, and usually hidden in rocks. So we assume that it might be some sort of thing, or like, hey, these people are a couple, or maybe these people passed on. But whatever we know, it's a male and a female paired up and put together. We see this icon all over the Fremont lands. We don't see that in the Ancestral Puebloans. So even though these peoples were genetically interconnected, they were connected with trade, and they're connected with a lot of their masonry ideas, and we know they traded corn. We have studied the corn strains that were traded back and forth, and we know all corn originated in Mexico, but different strains and just different breeds of corn got spread throughout. But they had their own ideas still. They were distinct and they were unique and they were different, but both of them had bighorn sheep on the brain. So to kind of conclude this, this is the mystery that we are still trying to understand. We're still trying to figure out what exactly bighorns meant. So again, just to sum this up, they weren't on people's minds enough to commend them to art in the times of the Ice Age up through the Archaic period. And even in the Archaic period, we have incredible petroglyphs and pictographs, but they don't show bighorns. And then about 2,000 years ago, explosion in multiple peoples of bighorns. And then once you get into historic times, suddenly people are still hunting, people are still doing rock art, but suddenly this icon of the bighorn all but disappears. And even today, in modern native cultures, you don't normally see the bighorn represented that powerfully as a totemic creature. It still matters. All creatures matter, and all creatures can have importance to people who are from this land. But you don't see it like you used to, where you saw it everywhere. So we don't know why, and this is what we're trying to figure out. So I would love to hear your comments down below as to what you think, why you think, not only why were bighorns so important when they weren't hunted that much, why were they so important, but also why they weren't important, then they were, and then they weren't again. What happened in that time period? What happened from 2,000 years ago to 700 years ago to have this huge influx of interest in artistic depiction, and what made it go down? Now, I'm going to put another link. I'm going to put a link in this video, actually. I want you to understand what it actually takes to make a petroglyph. And a lot of people do not know, and a lot of armchair archaeologists think that somebody just takes a rock and chisels. It doesn't. I've done a great study and do experimental archaeology, and I will show how it's done. So I'll put a link in this video so you can get a sense, because I actually chisel in a rock and do a petroglyph. of a bighorn sheep. So I'll show you how it's done, but I want you to know it does take a fair amount of work, and there's thought that goes into it. These are not done lightly. This is not doodling on a piece of paper. This is not somebody doing graffiti with a can of spray paint. This takes work, thought, and effort. So again, if you're going to command such an iconic image repeatedly all over the American West, has purpose. Tell me in the comments what you think that purpose is. And again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about it. And I'd love to hear everybody else's perspectives on it as well. But until then, always remember that life is a gift. So never stop learning and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time.